Think you understand what they'll do to her when I get her out of this country?
Time's not on her side.
Find her, Baron. The fallout from this is limitless.
The CIA just handed down an order that could get Joe killed. And honestly, episode 5 might be the moment where Lioness stops being a rescue story and turns into something way heavier. A question of whether Joe is actually walking out of this alive. Episode 4 left us in one of the darkest spots the show has ever put us in. Joe is still in Russian hands. That plane keeps pulling further from any protection the US can offer her, and Caitlyn has already been pushed into green-lighting an order that could end up putting Joe directly in harm's way. But here's what makes everything so much more tense. The CIA isn't just trying to bring one of their people home anymore. They're trying to stop a much bigger operation from turning into a full-blown national security nightmare, and Joe might be caught right in the middle of that fight. That's exactly why episode 5 gets so interesting, because it's not just about whether Joe makes it out. The real question is what she's willing to give up to make sure her team eventually tracks down whoever's behind her capture. And honestly, after everything episode 4 showed us, I don't buy that Joe is just sitting around waiting to be saved. I think she's already plotting her next move from inside enemy hands. So let's dig into what could actually happen next, because there are several clues buried in episode 4 that make episode 5 look a lot darker than it seems on the surface. Let's start with Joe, since basically everything in this episode circles back to her. Episode 4 made one thing obvious: she hasn't lost her grip. She might be tied down, cut off, and surrounded by people who want nothing more than to break her, but mentally, she's still playing the exact same long game she's played for years. That blood trail she left behind wasn't just some desperate move to rattle her captors. It was a signal meant for the people who understand exactly how her mind works. Joe knew that if her team showed up after she'd already been relocated, they'd need some kind of marker pointing them in the right direction. So she made her own. And that tells us a lot heading into episode 5. Joe isn't just hoping for a rescue. She's already gearing up for whatever comes after it. That distinction matters, because Lioness has never written Joe as someone who waits around for the mission to find her. She usually becomes the mission. And even locked up under Russian control, there's a good chance she's doing exactly that right now. The biggest threat hanging over Joe is that plane. Renat already made it painfully clear that being on American soil is the only thing shielding her from the worst of his plans. Once that aircraft touches down in Russia, that protection is gone. Every second in the air raises the stakes. The farther Joe gets, the harder any rescue becomes, and the more dangerous it gets if the CIA decides to step in. That's why the order involving the plane could end up being one of the biggest turning points of the whole episode. If that aircraft slips past the point where America can still act legally or strategically, Caitlyn is forced into a decision nobody would want to make. Does she risk sparking an international incident to get Joe back, or does she let the plane keep flying because stopping it could set off something even worse? And that's exactly where the title stops being just a dramatic tagline. Yes, the CIA basically gave an order that puts Joe's life on the line, but the reasoning behind that order might matter even more than the order itself. Caitlyn isn't signing off on this because she's stopped caring about Joe. She's doing what people in her position are trained to do, trying to keep one disaster from snowballing into 10. And that's what makes her arc so gut-wrenching. Caitlyn knows Joe. She knows what Joe represents to the whole organization. She knows everything Joe has already sacrificed. But she also knows that if the Russians manage to use this capture to expose American operations, flip compromised officials, or twist intelligence to their advantage, the fallout goes way beyond just one person's life. The tragedy here is that Caitlyn is being forced to weigh a human life against the safety of an entire operation, and I think episode 5 is where that pressure finally cracks through her composed, professional exterior. We already got a glimpse of that when Caitlyn showed up at Joe's house to talk to Neil. That scene wasn't just there to give Neil an update. It was there to make Caitlyn actually sit with the personal cost of her decision. In a briefing room, Joe is an asset, a commanding presence, a national security concern. In her own home, she's somebody's wife, somebody's family. And Caitlyn has to face Neil knowing there's a real chance she'll have to tell him Joe isn't coming home. That's a completely different kind of weight to carry. I think episode 5 pushes Caitlyn even deeper into that internal war. Once this operation spirals past anyone's ability to fully control it, Caitlyn may have to choose between following through on the order she gave or breaking the very rules she's built her entire career around enforcing. And that's where the emotional stakes really ramp up. Caitlyn has spent this whole season stuck making decisions that have no clean outcome. Every path costs her something. Save Joe, and she risks blowing the operation wide open. Let Joe go, and she loses someone who's been central to the entire Lioness program. Strike the plane, and she could trigger an international crisis. Wait too long, and Joe vanishes into Russian territory for good. There's no clean answer here, and that's exactly the kind of impossible spot where this show thrives. If episode 5 wants Caitlyn's arc to actually mean something, she can't just issue another order and walk away. At some point, she has to personally live with the consequences. Now let's get into the biggest question hanging over Joe's capture. Who actually sold her out? Because episode 5 has a real shot at tying together nearly every thread we've been following. The Russian intelligence operation, Alexandra, Yurimov, Operation Treasure, Kyle's rule-breaking, Caitlyn's mounting suspicions, it could all funnel back into one central mystery. Was Joe captured simply because the Russians outplayed the CIA this time? Or did someone inside the broader intelligence network deliberately set her up? Because if there was a leak, then Joe's capture wasn't some random misfortune, it was engineered. And that's where Alexandra becomes a really big piece of the puzzle. Her behavior has been off enough that I don't think the show wants us fully trusting her. She handed the CIA intel on Yurimov without asking for the kind of payoff or protection you'd normally expect in that world. And in a world where everyone has a price, free information should immediately raise red flags. Alexandra is far too sharp to give away something this valuable without knowing exactly what she's getting in return. Then there's the intel about the senators. She clearly knows how to run a double game and play both sides without getting caught. She's survived in an environment where one wrong step could expose everything. So why would she suddenly go fully transparent with the CIA? That question gets even more suspicious once Byron admits that months' worth of intel tied to Yurimov may have been fabricated or completely useless. If that intelligence was compromised from the start, then the mission Joe thought she was running might have been built on a lie the whole time. And if that's true, Joe wasn't hunting Yurimov. Someone may have been steering her straight toward him. Think about what that actually means. Joe could have spent months chasing information that seemed legitimate, going after targets that looked real, while whoever controlled that intel was quietly setting up something far bigger. And the second Joe got captured, the entire operation shifted. That doesn't feel like coincidence. It feels like a trap built to close at exactly the right moment. Now, I don't think episode 5 is going to spell everything out right away. Lioness tends to give you one answer while stacking 3 new questions on top of it, so we're probably looking at a major clue rather than a full reveal. Maybe someone inside the network gets identified. Maybe Alexandra's story starts unraveling. Maybe Joe pulls something out of her captors that confirms what she's already been suspecting. Or maybe the real twist is that whoever's really behind this isn't anyone Joe expected at all. And if that handler turns out to be tied to someone we've already met, this entire season could look totally different once we go back and rewatch the earlier episodes. That's exactly why Operation Treasure matters so much. At first it seemed like background noise, another intelligence op running in the shadows, but now it feels tightly connected to what's happening to Joe right now. The goal is to identify compromised assets and work backward to whoever's controlling them. That's a risky strategy, because the higher up the chain you climb, the more dangerous the person on the other end becomes. And if someone has managed to stay hidden for years, they're not going to just disappear the moment the CIA starts closing in. They're going to protect themselves. They're going to sacrifice other people to do it. And Joe's capture might be part of exactly that kind of self-preservation. Picture this. Whoever is behind Operation Treasure realizes Joe's team is getting too close for comfort. The easiest move isn't a direct fight with the CIA. It's removing Joe from the equation entirely, pulling her outside American jurisdiction, and forcing the CIA to choose between saving her and protecting the bigger picture. Suddenly, Joe isn't just a hostage, she's leverage, and that might be exactly why the Russians want her alive. If she were just a prisoner they wanted to punish, they wouldn't need a plan this complicated. But if Joe knows something, or if whoever's behind her capture needs her alive for a bigger purpose, then keeping her breathing becomes part of the strategy. Which brings us back to Renat. His warning about what happens once they cross into Russia shouldn't be brushed off. The show deliberately drew a line between what's happening now and what's coming next. Joe knows her window of protection is shrinking, so do her captors. That means episode 5 could open with a straight-up race against the clock. Joe has to find a way to escape, send a signal, or manipulate the people around her before that plane reaches its destination. Her team has to figure out exactly where she's headed and whether they can cut her off in time. Caitlyn has to decide just how far she's actually willing to go, and Byron has to deal with the political fallout if this whole thing collapses. This is where Joe's mind becomes her sharpest weapon. She doesn't have her weapons, her tech, or her team backing her up, but she still knows how to read people. And Joe has always understood one thing: people give away more when they think they're the ones in control. So I fully expect her to start working her captors in episode 5, not through some massive escape attempt, but through small, calculated moves, asking the right question, saying the right thing, giving someone a reason to underestimate her, letting them think she's weaker than she really is. That's how Joe survives. She doesn't need to overpower an entire room, she just needs one mistake from whoever's standing across from her. And honestly, that blood trail from episode 4 already proves she thinks this way. She was already planning for what her team would need once she vanished. So why would she stop there? If she realizes the Russians are moving her again, she could easily be leaving another clue. Maybe something from inside the plane. Maybe a location, a name, a detail that ends up mattering later. Maybe she even lets one of her captors believe they've gotten the upper hand on her. Whatever the move is, I don't think Joe's storyline is heading toward passivity. The more dangerous her situation gets, the more calculating she's likely to become. Now let's talk about Kyle, because his storyline might seem separate right now, but I think it's building towards something much bigger. In episode 4, Kyle broke protocol by killing a Russian intelligence officer who was already restrained. Caitlyn could have come down hard on him for it. Instead, the consequences were messier than that. She was already buried in a much bigger crisis, and Kyle basically got pushed toward people willing to operate outside the normal rules. That tells me the show is prepping Kyle for a mission where the usual playbook won't cut it anymore, and that's dangerous, because Kyle has already proven that when he decides the mission demands it, he'll cross a line before anyone else is even ready to. Put a guy like that into a rescue operation involving Joe, Russian intelligence, and a plane the CIA might be ordered to intercept, and suddenly, you've got someone who could completely flip the outcome of this whole thing. He might end up being the reason Joe gets home safe, or he could spark another international incident trying to make it happen. If Cody Spears gets pulled into this too, things get even messier, because Caitlyn could be sending people into an operation with basically zero margin for error. I wouldn't be shocked if episode 5 puts Kyle right back in a spot where he has to make a huge call without waiting on permission, and this time, the fallout could be a lot bigger. If Kyle breaks protocol again to save Joe, Caitlyn has to decide whether to shield him or expose what he did. If he plays it by the book, Joe might not survive long enough for the official plan to actually work. That's exactly the kind of no-win situation this season has been steadily building toward. Kyle's earlier violation wasn't just there to make him look reckless. It might be setting up the exact moment where his willingness to break the rules ends up being the only reason someone makes it out alive. But while all eyes are on Joe, I think the political side of this story is about to get just as explosive. Byron is dealing with intelligence that may have been compromised for months. Maxim Petro is making it very clear that Russia expects the US to fully understand the consequences of what's happened, and the idea that Russia lost something valuable and wants it back suggests there's a much bigger negotiation happening behind the scenes. Joe might be the crisis we can see, but she could just be one piece of a much larger bargaining chip. That's exactly why Caitlyn's order to engage the aircraft carries so much weight. If the plane gets intercepted, the US is making a direct move against a Russian operation. If it doesn't, Joe is essentially being handed over. Either way, somebody loses, and Russia knows it. They might even be counting on the fact that America literally cannot make a clean decision here. This entire situation could have been engineered to box the CIA into a corner where every single choice benefits whoever orchestrated Joe's capture in the first place. And that's exactly why I think episode 5 could end on a massive cliffhanger. I don't think we're getting Joe's rescue in this episode. Honestly, I think holding that off is the smarter move. If Joe gets pulled out too fast, all the tension built around her capture just deflates. But if her team gets close and something goes wrong at the last second, the danger suddenly feels 100 times more real. Maybe they find the plane but can't legally move against it. Maybe they get confirmation Joe's alive right as the aircraft crosses another line. Maybe Caitlyn finally gives the order and immediately learns something that changes everything. Or maybe Joe creates her own opening that nobody on the outside even saw coming. There's another angle I think could end up being one of the most emotional parts of this episode. Neil might finally have to accept that just waiting for Joe to come home isn't enough anymore. He could be forced to reckon with the fact that the person he loves has become the center of something way bigger than their family. Caitlyn's visit already planted that emotional weight. Episode 5 could crank it up even further. If Caitlyn comes back with another update, or if Neil finds out the CIA has authorized an action that could get Joe killed, the personal stakes of this whole operation become impossible to look away from. That's really what makes the threat of Joe dying hit so hard. The show doesn't actually need to kill her for the audience to genuinely believe it could happen. The possibility alone changes the temperature of every single scene. Every time Joe gets moved, every time that plane shifts course, every time Caitlyn gets a new piece of intel, we're all asking the same question. Is this the moment we lose her?